Welcome, everybody. Today's episode is going to be on alcohol use. And I wanted to preface this by saying we are not going to be shaming anybody for alcohol use in this podcast. We wanted to just have an open and honest conversation about alcohol use and how it can affect our mental health.
Yes. In fact, Rachel and I are known for our love for breweries, local breweries. So, yeah, no shame around it.
Yeah, I will say, we'll be honest right here. We both drink, so we're not
Yeah.
going to be shaming anybody for, any alcohol use at all. But we wanted to have just an honest conversation around alcohol use, what it means, what are the possible effects on our mood and mental health, regardless of if you have a mood disorder or mental health condition or not. We are going to be discussing all of that today. But first, I wanted to jump in and give our disclaimer here that this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening or watching does not create a provider-patient relationship. We want to recommend that you always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified health professional if you have any questions regarding your specific health or nutrition needs. And also, for those of you who are new here, we should probably introduce who we are. So I am Rachel Robinson. Hi, I am a dietitian.
And I'm Ilkay Washesky. I'm also a dietitian.
And we love talking about everything related to nutrition and mental health. So, welcome if you are new here, and welcome back if you are a repeat listener.
Okay, so I want to actually begin with this.
Okay.
So, I feel like you and I are closer in the age. I didn't want to tell my age at first, but I'm actually proud of it. I'm almost 30 years old. So, I feel like times are changing so quickly, and back when we are growing up, drinking or being able to drink was definitely a sign of maturity, and you would want to do it. But things are kind of shifting a little bit. I think right now it's something else, and then that's like vape. I think is taking a place of alcohol a little bit.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. I have seen that shift over the years. Like am already in my 30s too, so we'll just tell everyone our ages right now. But
Yes.
having grown up, yeah, I would agree. It definitely was that attitude, and you saw that in society and in movies and everything too, of like, oh, high school parties or college parties, and everyone drank. It was just a sign of like, oh, you've reached adulthood. You're mature now that you can handle alcohol, or you can drink. But I would say like having a large age gap with my siblings, looking at this younger Gen Z generation, I feel like the alcohol use is much lower. Like, and it may not be that use is lower. I mean, maybe use is lower, but I think that pressure, the societal pressure on them,
Mhm.
is a lot lower. I see much less of the, oh, I can't wait to drink. Let's go to parties and drink. It's yeah, like you said, I think vape is much bigger. I think marijuana use is much bigger as
Yeah.
well, especially now that it's legal in so many states, and it wasn't legal at all when we were younger.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting change over time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's also a shift in society too, like the way we look at health and longevity overall. We want to be healthier. We want to look the best. We want to have a plump, perky skin, and we want to look. I don't know the best version of ourselves. I think that also has some sort of an impact on it too. Um,
Hmm.
but overall, maybe a shift from like that's another thing that I was kind of thinking as well. Shift from like this overall health, physical health. Besides that, we're also focusing so much on our mental health too.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it is. I think it's becoming much more known that our past and coping strategies can impact so many areas of our life, and so it's becoming, I think, more known that being able to adopt better coping strategies is just better in general for our life in so
Hmm.
many ways. There was an interesting study with Gallup. You're
Hmm.
familiar with the Gallup polls, in August of this year, that
Hmm.
mentioned that 54% of American adults were reporting that they drink, which is over half, but is an all-time low. Gallup originally started reporting statistics back in like the 1930s. So this
30.
is kind of crazy that this was at an all-time low. I think it's its height was in the high like 60s or low 70% or something like that. And of the people that did report that they drank, only 40%, or actually 40% of them said that it had been more than a week since they drank,
Mhm.
which is actually kind of interesting too, because you're seeing that even among the people that are reporting drinking, which is low, the people that do drink are not drinking as frequently either. So we're seeing
Yeah.
like this drop in alcohol use. And I don't know if you saw in the news this last like week or two, there was a big distillery in Kentucky, one of the big whiskey distilleries down there that is closing up shop for a bit. And I
Mm.
I think they said it was something regarded to like maintenance they're doing or whatever, but it's like their big headquarters that's going to be shut down for like the next year or so. And I
Mhm.
think it's just a points to a larger sign of like the use of alcohol just dropping in the
Yeah,
current day and age.
50% is a lot, like, considering, so, we both are based in Midwest. Considering that, every small Wisconsin town, even the ones that doesn't have any, grocery stores, has bars in them. Yeah, the consumption is very little. Or people are lying, either one of those things. Yeah, 54% is absolutely low. And I think this general shift again, like in the health belief system overall, like we want to be healthier than our previous selves, I guess. That's also another impact to it too. And
I think it is interesting to note that kind of some of the polls do back up what you've been saying about maybe a drop in alcohol use related to kind of this more interest in health. Because in that same Gallup poll, they kind of asked people with different levels of drinking. So, moderation drinking 1 to 2 drinks a day, and then like excessive drinking. How much do you believe each of these are related to being like bad for your health?
Mhm.
And 53% of people said that they agreed that even moderate drinking, like drinking 1 to 2 drinks a day, was bad for your health, which is also at an all time high. So I think
Mhm.
we're starting to see the shift in people recognizing that it's not just your I'm drinking a pack of beer a night as being bad for my
Yeah.
health. Because I think pretty much everybody, I think, can agree that we know that that's bad for your health. But more and more people are now saying, oh, even this moderate drinking of 1 to 2 drinks a day is bad for my health. And there is research that does support this, that the drinking only 1 to 2 drinks a day every day, or the equivalent 7 to 14 drinks a week, is
Mhm.
bad for your health. We see in research that even just drinking 1.5 drinks a day increases risk of pancreatitis, liver cirrhosis, hypertension, so high blood pressure, and stroke. And obviously, the risk goes up the more that you're drinking every day. But even just your drink and a half a day, increasing that risk is pretty significant.
Yes. Well, can we say that now, like because of all of these things happening, like our understanding of health is changing a little bit too. Now we're a little bit more precise with certain things, and we want to make sure that we're living long enough. So can we say, like, as a result, the society's pressure now is changing on drinking? Because that question. It's like a little bit of a weird, uncomfortable conversation that people have with each other when somebody says, I don't drink, like it becomes
Mhm.
um that like, okay, maybe they had some sort of a problem in the past and now they don't drink kind of a thing. But I've met with multiple people who doesn't want to drink because they have higher muscle mass, for example, and they want to make sure
Mhm.
because they get negative impacts from it, I guess. Like, do you think that the societal pressure is now a little less right now, or like how's that affecting us right now?
No, I think that's a great point. I do think like the societal pressure on people who choose not to drink is less, and I think it's more
Mhm.
accepted in this day and age. I think people tend to not question it as much. It's not I think back in the day, if you said, "Oh, I don't drink," people are instantly like, "Oh, do you have an alcohol problem?"
Yeah.
Or it's "Oh, are you pregnant?"
Yeah.
And it's like, now it's much more of like, "Oh, okay, no problem." And I think you see that the shift in that too with restaurants and bars offering many more mocktail options now
Yeah.
too. I think they're recognizing people just want a fancy little drink. They want to feel good. And so being able to have those non-alcoholic options for people makes it a little bit more accessible and I think less intimidating when people don't want to drink.
Mhm.
I think the other thing is too, alcohol's become so much more mainstream in its effects on things that affect people now. And what I mean by that is we have known for a long time, like research has shown, alcohol is can cause and lead to some of these severe physiological problems like
Mhm.
cirrhosis, pancreatitis, whatever. But those are so far out. Like you have to be drinking for an extended period of time to usually develop these, or be binge drinking, to really develop these quickly. So a lot of times you hear this as a young person, you're like, oh, I'd only get cirrhosis in my 50s if I was an alcoholic for 30 years, right?
Yeah.
But now we're starting to see like alcohol use affecting fertility. And so there's a
Mhm.
lot of people out there that are young that are like, well, if that's affecting my swimmers, or my ability to get pregnant and I really want a baby,
Yeah.
like then they're going to be cutting out this alcohol use and they're going to be like, wow, maybe this isn't that hard to continue doing after the fact. So I think you're seeing a lot more younger people cutting it
So
out for that.
we know a lot more too. I think that's also another impact as well. Like we know what else could be affected by alcohol use. Just like you referred to it, back then it was just like, oh yeah, you'll get cirrhosis, but then you see all the other things too. Even when we have some like problems with some GI problems, alcohol is not recommended, or any other issues, alcohol is not recommended. It just kind of like messes up with your body in a way. It's kinda hard to
Hmm.
metabolize, I guess. So I wanna actually share something like some sort of like a personal observation with you. And you know that I'm not from the Midwest area. I moved into this area 5 years ago for college. And during that time, one of the thing that was kinda like just so interesting to me, I go to a town, there's no grocery store, but there are 3 bars, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, and alcohol consumption is everything is surrounded around alcohol consumption around here too. It's one of the problems as well, around Midwest. But I was wondering, and overall in an entire USA, what would be like from being like around this area, which
Mhm.
state would have the highest alcohol consumption? Like I'm betting on Wisconsin. I know you would bet on Minnesota because that's where you live. I think the highest one New Hampshire is the highest one,
Okay.
followed by Delaware, Nevada, North Dakota, and Montana. Wisconsin is on the number 8. Oh, excessive drinking rates. Montana and Wisconsin were the top 2 states at 24% of the population, and Minnesota was number 6.
All right. So excessive drinking rates. So
Congratulations,
that's
Wisconsin.
what's interesting because I think the New Hampshire uh statistic is New Hampshire may consume more alcohol, I think, per capita, but when you
Uh-huh.
look, they must have a lot more people that just moderately drink versus Wisconsin has much more people that excessively drink. So the people who do drink a lot in
We're
Wisconsin.
winners, Wisconsin. We won again.
I think it's kind of funny though because it goes back to your conversation on societal expectations around drinking too, because the amount that you drink is really going to be dependent on like where you live and who you interact with. Because having grown up in the Midwest too, a lot more people do drink, and so I think you saw a lot more of people being like, why aren't you drinking if you decided that you didn't want to drink versus like in other states. Like when I moved to Ohio for a short time, I actually noticed that alcohol was way less consumed there by people. It wasn't
Yeah.
like centered in the social settings as much as it is in the Midwest. Well, I
Yeah,
guess Ohio is still the Midwest, but I kind of consider it a little more east
yeah,
compared to your really dead center Midwest, where winters
yeah,
are cold and there's nothing to do here but drink.
100%.
um,
I mean, um, yeah, there are a lot of social events because I can look at it from my own perspective too. I think ever since I moved to Midwest, my alcohol consumption went up a little bit too because just like you said, every social gathering has some sort of an impact of alcohol. Like you have some sort of an alcohol, like whether it's like some I don't know, whether it's Christmas, Thanksgiving, or, you're doing some sort of like family gathering, barbecue, going on a boat, fishing,
yeah,
every
fishing.
activity is fishing 100%. Every activity
Yeah.
is somehow tied to alcohol. So,
Mhm. Well, and it's just so fascinating too because when I was in Ohio, I had come back for the holidays in Minnesota and we had been drinking a ton being back for the holidays.
yeah.
And going back to Ohio, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a break from alcohol for a bit. I want to try like sober or dry January is what it's called,
January.
and just like not drink. And just to give myself a little bit of a liver detox,
Yeah.
mildly for how much I'd been drinking over the holidays. And I remember probably like it was a little over 2 weeks, probably closer to 3 weeks into the year at that point, and I'd gone out with a couple friends, and we just decided to go get a drink. And we were there, and I remember mentioning to them, wow, this is my first drink in a long time. I haven't had a drink in a while. And they were like, well, how long has it been? And I'm like, like 2 weeks or so. And they all both looked at me like I had an alcohol problem, of the like, really? Like, that's it? That's not that long. And it was just kind
Yeah.
of funny to me because it really like showcased to me like how different alcohol use is in different areas.
Yeah.
And it did kind of make me reflect a little bit more on like how much I was actually drinking. Not that I was drinking insane amounts by any means, but it did just make me more aware of how often and how much I was drinking at the time. Because I would say ever since being in Ohio, my personal alcohol use has dropped way off. Like I will still drink here and there, but it's like, maybe once a month.
No, I think I'm glad that you've mentioned about it because here is the thing. Here's the problem. Not the problem, but there's also a cultural aspect surrounded around it too. Like from where you're living, and this doesn't have to be when we say cultural. I'm talking about like anything that's about humans and human beings, their
Hmm.
lifestyles, whatever. So there's like cultural aspect to it too, and that's why we don't look at it in a way of like shame on you. Yes, there are different places. Yes, in different countries and different places you have different kind of alcohols that they make with different ingredients. So I think there is a social aspect of it too, and that's why it should not be looked at it that way. But of course, if you prefer to not to drink alcohol too, I respect that.
Really, I think moderation is what comes into play with pretty much everything, right? If you
Yeah.
do choose to drink, like it's going to be more beneficial if it's in moderation than if you're drinking excessively, but also like totally okay and no shame if you choose not to drink at all either. It's kind
Yeah.
of find where do you feel personally is best for you, but kind of shifting kind of gears, I guess, into alcohol and its effects on mental health because we've talked a lot about just physical health here. And this is what our podcast is for, is mental health. So kind of like how does alcohol impact our mental health? And I think it's kind of interesting to note that it can really affect us in multiple different ways. And I think the most obvious way we can kind of start with here is that if you already have a pre-existing mood disorder like depression and you are seeking treatment for it or you're in treatment for it, and that could be seeing a therapist or taking pharmacological approaches with medications. Research has shown, and we do know, that alcohol use, even in very, very small quantities, while currently seeking treatment for mood disorders, it has negative effects.
Mhm.
It's really just something that you should be abstaining from at that point, just because one, it can interfere with medication side effects,
Yes.
and or cause medication side effects. But two, it can also prevent us from adopting better coping strategies for handling our mood disorders, right?
Mhm. There's also do you think that there's also, like, some chemical impact of it too that makes a different shifts and, like, neurotransmitters? Because I feel like we've talked about this at some point. I remember that as well.
No, I think it's great that you bring up the neurotransmitters is something that I think is very important to talk about because on one hand, we do know like alcohol use reduces the availability of tryptophan,
Mhm.
which is an amino acid, as you know, but it's an amino acid that is a precursor to the production of serotonin, the
Oh,
neurotransmitter in our brain that is responsible for a lot of these senses of happiness or pleasure, mood regulation in general in the brain. And serotonin is definitely one of those neurotransmitters that we know is related to mood disorders like depression. The other kind of area or neurotransmitter that alcohol does have an effect on as well is dopamine. We talked
mhm.
about dopamine and the kind of reward pathways and areas of
Yeah.
the brain a little bit in our ADHD podcast. If you're interested in listening to that, that's our very first one. No judging if you go listen to that one. But is alcohol kind of affects the feelings of anhedonia, which
Mhm.
is the inability to feel pleasure. It is a symptom of depression that is commonly used in diagnosing depression. It's essentially where you lack any sort of pleasure from, or you don't really get any pleasure from doing things.
Like, doing things like anything, accomplishing a task doesn't give you, like, that satisfaction. You know how you get after you take a shower, you kinda, like, feel like, "Oh, yeah, I got done with one more task that needs to get done today,"
Mhm.
kind of a thing, and then,
Yeah.
when you're in depression, you usually don't like to take a shower.
Yeah, it's like it's experiencing like partial or total loss of any sort of pleasure in
Mhm.
pretty much anything. It's
Yeah.
kind of where like when you're dealing with depression, you can have that feeling of just like, ugh, nothing sounds fun right now.
Yeah.
Like nothing sounds like it would be fun. Even things that I enjoy doing, like maybe it's a hobby I love doing every day. That just sounds like the worst thing in the world. Doesn't sound fun. That's anhedonia.
Mhm.
And it's anhedonia is originates from the dopaminergic, mesolimbic, and mesocortical reward circuits in the brain. So what that means is there are pathways in the brain that are reward pathways. They utilize dopamine in those pathways. So two kind of brain areas that are in these the mesolimbic pathway is the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are the brain areas that we talked about in our podcast episode on ADHD, because those are areas of the brain that are associated with learning, reward motivation, and the reinforcement of activities. So when we start doing something, the dopamine gives us a little bit more of like, yes, you can do this, keep doing this, and you'll keep doing it. These are areas that are impaired in ADHD, which, if you're interested in listening to that podcast episode, you can go back to our first episode to listen to. We talk about a little bit of the brain areas there. But we know that alcohol can impair some of these areas and
Mhm.
impact dopamine levels. So, which is why after drinking, even a drink the night before, if you go to bed and wake up the next morning, you can have kind of this mild anhedonia in the morning where you might feel a little less motivated or feeling a little less pleasure in the things that you would normally do. So that's kind of that impact on the dopamine levels. And this is irregardless of if you have a mood disorder or not. Alcohol has
Mhm.
just this impact on dopamine.
So it's creating like a almost like a depression, like an impact by kind of like decreasing the amount of dopamine that we secrete in our body.
Yeah, essentially, it has an impact, yeah, on the dopamine systems.
Mhm.
And it's kind of interesting to note too that anhedonia is noticed in withdrawal from alcohol. So
Mhm.
people who have an alcohol use disorder and they go through withdrawal of alcohol, even if they don't have a mood disorder, they do exhibit this anhedonia, like very
Mhm.
severe anhedonia, where they lose any pleasure in anything as this dopamine system's trying to re-regulate itself because it's no longer having alcohol to do that,
Mhm.
which I think is kind of interesting to note. Like with the anxiety effects of alcohol, right? We know that like when we drink, or I should say, some of us, we know when we drink that we can have this anxiety reducing effect. Like you hear of people using alcohol as liquid courage, right? Like
Yes.
I'm so anxious, I don't want to, talk to people. I'm going to drink. I suddenly feel better.
I have an example for that. I think, there is even a research that supports this. If you're a bilingual, when you drink alcohol, you're feeling a lot more confident to be able to speak your second language, and it makes you feel more courageous. And
Mhm.
that's why, and therefore, you have bilingual people speaking that other language, like the language that they learned after a while or their second language a lot better when they drink alcohol because they feel more courageous. So if you wanna learn a language, you gotta be shameless. That's the bottom line. That's the message.
Yeah. Well, it's the alcohol kind of impairs that frontal lobe, right?
Yeah.
It reduces inhibition. So
Mhm.
like a lot of the times in our brain where we have the, oh my gosh, they're going to judge me if I do this, or I'm going to sound so stupid, stopping us from doing things. Alcohol inhibits that and makes you think like, "Ooh, I'm on top of the world," right? So you
Yeah.
have these like, I'm awesome and great. So you have these kind of the anxiety reducing effects of alcohol on this, but the byproduct of that is like the next day your dopamine systems are out of whack, you suddenly are
Yeah.
going to have no pleasure in doing things. Your serotonin could be decreased, especially if you're consuming alcohol on a daily basis. So overall, you're just, if you don't have depression or a mood disorder, you're just going to feel like blah compared to how you normally would. But if you
Mhm.
have a mood disorder and these systems like dopamine and serotonin are already impaired with ADHD or mood disorders like depression or anxiety, you're going to feel even worse the next day. So if your baseline is to have mild anhedonia every day where you have just a mild loss of pleasure in doing things, and then you're drinking on top of that, you
Mhm.
could potentially be making it even worse for
Yeah.
yourself with
Like, I wanna
managing.
put this into perspective. Let's get back into the time that we when we were in the college, like, that's what it reminds me of. We would go out on Friday nights or Saturday nights, and then the day after, I would have, like, a huge anxiety in the morning. I would feel horrible, really bad about myself, like, I'm missing the day, like, something isn't right. I would feel, like, overly anxious and overly unhappy. So I'm just
Mhm.
referring back to the day after that you drink alcohol and that horrible feeling that you get. You feel like you're missing the day or you're doing something wrong.
Which I think is a great example of the impacts on like serotonin or dopamine. But also, one area that I find interesting too that alcohol impacts is our CRF system, which is more
Mhm,
related to why we may have this, what we call, quote, hangxiety, after
mhm.
binge drinking in a night. So I'm going to back up a little bit and just kind of mention what is the CRF system. So you've heard
Okay.
of the fight or flight system, right?
Yes, I did.
So for those who don't know, the fight or flight system is where our sympathetic nervous system, it provides our body with a burst of energy to be able to respond to any sort of perceived threat that we have. So
Okay.
it does this by causing epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, to be
Mhm.
released from our adrenal glands. So this would be like if I saw a dinosaur running at me, or a bear, if I saw a bear running at me
The
and I know like,
dinosaur, it
oh
was a
my.
little bit of a stretch, like, I just start taking picture, like, 'cause there's a dinosaur, you know? Okay,
So
bear is great. Bear is a great example.
So if I see like a bear running at me, I'm going to
Mhm.
be like, "Oh my god, like what am I going to do here?" My fight or flight system's going to kick in. So
Uh-huh.
epinephrine is going to be instantly released from my adrenals. This is going to flood my body and allow for glucose to be released into my bloodstream. Why? Because glucose is used for energy in the muscles and organs of our body. So if we have more glucose available in the bloodstream, our muscles have the ability to uptake that and use that to fuel being able to run away or
Yeah.
fight from the threat. So, this is why when we're chronically stressed too, we can see higher blood sugar levels in people,
Mhm.
or when you have chronic illnesses, or not even necessarily chronic illness, but acute illness, I should say, like people in the ICU can have more higher glucose levels in their body. So on top of the adrenaline kind of causing this release of glucose in the bloodstream, it also
Mhm.
will increase our breathing rate, our heart rate, and our blood pressure. Why? Because this gives us more oxygen. Our muscles also need oxygen in order to function. So it has, this byproduct of getting us prepared to be able to protect ourselves. But
Mhm.
after this initial epinephrine or adrenaline is worn off, our because it's not very long lasting that pumps through initially, our body may still need to be able to respond to the threat. So after the initial like, oh my god, there's a bear, but then if the bear, turns around and runs the other way, I no longer need to fight it. So then my body's gonna be like, okay, we're good. And then we'll kind of come back to homeostasis. But if the bear is still charging me and now I'm like, oh shit, I actually have to like fight this bear or protect myself, that's where our body wants to make sure that we continue to have this glucose available for energy, continue to get more oxygen. And this is where the HPA axis comes into play. So the
Mhm.
HPA axis stands for hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal gland axis. So that's the H, the P, and the A.
And the A.
So, yes, and the A. So the hypothalamus and pituitary gland are in our brain, and then the
Mhm.
adrenal glands are down by our kidneys. Not that that really matters for this explanation. I just thought it was interesting to mention.
It is pretty good.
if
Like, it really
yeah,
is an axis, yeah.
if the brain still perceives that this threat is ongoing, after the initial adrenaline is worn off, then our hypothalamus in our brain is going to release what's called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH.
Mhm.
This then hormone goes to tell our pituitary gland, also in the brain, to release what's called andron I'm going to butcher this word, adrenocorticotropic hormone, just called ACTH for short. That's what I'm going to be
Okay.
referring to it from here on.
Yes.
ACTH then travels down to the adrenal glands and causes it to release cortisol. So
Mhm.
cortisol is what allows our body to remain in this sense of fight or flight until
Okay.
our threat has passed. So After the threat has passed, then the parasympathetic nervous system comes into action, brings us back down to homeostasis. So cortisol is kind of the main sustainer, I guess, of that fight or flight system.
So, okay, what I'm understanding from this, the bottom line is cortisol levels like going up, our fight system is in, fight or flight system is in, going down,
Mhm.
our fight or flight system is down. Okay, perfect.
Yep. Where does CRF come into this? So the CRF system is the system responsible for regulating specifically the CRH hormone.
Okay.
So I mentioned previously that the CRH, the corticotropin releasing hormone, is the one that's released by the hypothalamus.
Mhm.
So the CRF system is kind of in that hypothalamus kind of area, not specifically, but it regulates that hormone that's released by the hypothalamus.
Mhm.
So that's the hormone, sets off the chain of reactions to keep us in fight or flight. Alcohol has specifically been observed to interact with the CRF system. In mice models, they've seen this happen. So
Okay.
when the CRF system is impaired or impacted by like alcohol, it's going to either completely shut off the release of that hormone and cause us that anxiety reducing effects when we're drinking, but then can cause like this over release of this after the fact the next day, where we're going to have that then anxiety producing effect where we're going to feel more anxious the next day.
Mhm.
So essentially it gives that like anti-anxiety effects while we're drinking, and then produces more of that hormone after the fact and can cause that
So is it
anxiety that we feel.
Can we say, like, is it like it's produced more? So alcohol reduces that cortisol, like, it reduces the cortisol, so you have, like, reduced stress levels, and that's actually what we
Mhm,
see then. Like, that's why people are consuming alcohol because 'cause they're feeling stressed out, and then it brings the stress level down by reducing the cortisol, but it is
mhm,
produced a little bit more later on to kinda catch up to that level, and then
mhm,
there's also this factor that when we're waking up, and I think this is from, like, again, between you and I, we talked about it, and that's why we have, like, some higher level of blood sugar in the morning too. It's like we already produce naturally on a day-to-day basis cortisol, so maybe that's why we
mhm,
have, like, a higher cortisol level in the morning, and our anxiety comes from there. To me, that's really
mhm,
fascinating to understand, like, that pathway, you know? Like,
mhm.
I'm like, "Oh, it makes sense. No wonder why I'm feeling like this."
Yeah. Well, and like you mentioned too, yeah, cortisol is a natural hormone that is released in our bodies and is released more in the mornings. It's a way to help wake our bodies up in the morning to get us moving
Mhm.
and going. So when we're already experiencing that cortisol in the morning, if we've been drinking the night before, it can have an effect on this system to cause even maybe a rebound, or we don't really necessarily know the exact mechanism, but we know that it impacts and causes this release of the hormone more, which then cascades down the HPA axis and then causes more cortisol to be released. So if we're already releasing cortisol in the morning, we drank the night before, we may now be having excessive cortisol being released and causing even more like anxiety like symptoms, because now that's like over that threshold. This can be even more profound if we already have anxiety when we
Mhm.
wake up in the morning,
Yeah.
and then you've been drinking the night before as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is one of the most fascinating parts for me, like learning about cortisol, seriously. So alcohol consumption, it's kind of interfering with the cortisol. At the same time, we see that with inflammation too. When we're sick, it's increased. And that's why we have
Mhm,
like a slightly elevated blood sugar too. We were talking about that as well. Then, this makes me think that maybe alcohol consumption can also impact any kind of inflammation related condition, whether it's because
systems, yeah.
yes, and we also see, with, inflammation, it's kinda can be caused by, microbiome too, which we will be addressing it,
Mm.
in our future and our February episode. I kinda am wondering what are some of the, researches that are supporting that.
No, I do think it's interesting that, yeah, you bring up the inflammation and then the microbiome for sure, because there are definitely, I have run into this too, where there are people who, when they drink, or they'll say whenever they drink that their bowels end up needing to be moved.
Mhm,
It's interesting to me because I think a lot of that is probably related to alcohol's effect on our microbiome, but we have a lot of interesting research on the microbiome and how it links to our mental health, which we will be talking about next month. February here, we're going to do a series that we think will be interesting exploring microbiome and its link to mental health. It's a very newer area of research, but there's been a lot of progress made just in the last 5 years, even
Yeah,
among
the name is
about
For the
this.
Love of Gut.
Exactly. So, alcohol, though, like I mentioned earlier, alcohol consumption leads to an increase of depression symptoms, worsening depression if you already have it, as well as can have like these side effects of like anhedonia in people who don't have a mood disorder as well. But we have found that alcohol consumption can be related to changes in our microbiome or the microbiota, which is specifically the bacteria that live in our digestive systems. Yes, we have bacteria that lives in our body. Not all bacteria is bad. The microbiome is actually very, very large inside of our large and small intestines, and it's a lot of good bacteria. They serve us well. They are friends to us.
Yes.
But when they get out of whack and certain ones grow more than others, we can have issues. So, what's interesting is that we've seen in some of these mice studies that depression may not only be caused by serotonin imbalance or the, dopamine changes, but it could be affected by immune activation, specifically the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And we've observed in mice models that there are very specific pro-inflammatory cytokines that are increased in depression, and specifically with alcohol exposure, alcohol use, changing the microbiome, leading to
Mhm.
kind of this pro inflammation, which is causing some of the depressive like behaviors in mice that are exposed to ethanol. More research is going to be needed on this, especially within humans, but it's kind of interesting to note that preliminarily we might be seeing that alcohol is not just inflammatory physically, but could potentially be inflammatory in the brain. But to kind of like wrap all of our research up here, alcohol has an impact on our serotonin levels by reducing availability of tryptophan. It can have an impact on our dopamine reward pathways, causing anhedonia. It can interfere with our management of current mood disorders that we have through medication interactions or even impairing our ability to develop healthier coping strategies. And then it can also affect our fight or flight systems and cause higher releases of cortisol, increasing anxiety within our bodies. Potentially, then also this microbiome component. So that's
Yeah.
just kind of all to summarize a little bit of what we were talking about in the research.
I'm glad actually we addressed that because, most of the time a lot of people, and that's where it kind of begins. I think right now it's a little bit better in the society. People kind of want to make sure that it's like they see this, it's tied to some sort of like a mental problem too, and then how it affects your mental health as well. But at the same time, we mainly see our like how it's affect our body rather than, our mental
Mhm,
health. We just focus on the
mhm,
negative impacts of alcohol where when it just when some sort of like intoxication arises and then we decide to do something, or when we have some like liver dysfunction going on.
mhm.
And I think as a podcast, since we're focusing on the mental health so much, I'm glad that we covered this aspect of it.
Yeah, I think exactly. It's I think a lot of the focus and conversation around alcohol tends to be very much of don't use it as a coping strategy, but there is a lot of negative impacts to alcohol use, and that we even see in just small consumption. And it's not to say that we should never drink alcohol again or nobody should ever drink alcohol. It's really just to say to be mindful of these are some of the effects that alcohol can have on our bodies. But if
Yeah.
you do feel like, oh, maybe my alcohol use is to a point where it may be unmanageable, or I want to cut back, or insert, whatever kind of negative feelings you might be having about that. I would highly suggest like reaching out to a healthcare provider and talking about this, because
Mhm.
there are options to be able to help with cutting back on alcohol use if that's something that you think you might struggle with.
Yeah, since you talked about that, that's another thing that I was wondering. How do we know that this is actually a problem? Like what is alcohol using disorder? Cuz like we all consume alcohol, but when do we go to our provider? Like when do we know that this is actually a problem for us? Because I think that's also another thing because our perception of problem is a little bit different. If somebody can afford a
Mhm.
beer every single day like financially, and then their environment is enabling for them, I don't think I don't think it's gonna be noticed if you are, like, pushed to that direction. If you're as long as you're happy with it and you have a low self-awareness, which a lot of us do with many distractions throughout the day, then it's really hard to recognize that you have some sort of a disorder going on. When do we realize that this is a disorder, for example?
So it's interesting, I think, that you mentioned that. I always like to bring up that alcohol use disorder doesn't actually have, if you have like the surveys that,
Mhm,
or criteria for alcohol use disorder, none of the criteria. And so a lot of times it can be really hard to admit when you do have a use disorder or not. And that's why I think it's important to just be, for people to be cognizant, right, of how much I'm drinking and what's my relationship with alcohol like, just in general, whether you drink or not drink, and use that to help kind of base what you want your relationship with it to look like. But specifically, like criterias of alcohol use disorder are things like, have you had times when you ended up drinking more or longer than you originally intended?
uh-huh,
Was there times where you've tried to cut back on alcohol but struggled to or couldn't keep that up? Is there times where you spent a lot of time drinking, or being sick from drinking, or just having to get over like a hangover or the side effects from drinking? Is there times where you want a drink so badly that you literally couldn't think of anything else? Have you
mhm.
found that drinking or being sick after drinking has interfered with other things in your life, like taking care of your family or your home, work
Like, interrupting
troubles,
your
or
day-to-day
school?
life pretty much, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Or another one too would be, have you continue to drink even though it was making you feel depressed or anxious, or was
Mhm.
adding to certain health problems, and like you wanted to cut back and couldn't? Or have you had times where you had alcohol related memory blackouts? So
Yeah.
those are all kind of like, there's some more questions. That's just some of them. It's just something to kind of be aware of and think that if you did answer yes to any of those, maybe that's a conversation to have with your care provider. Or maybe that's a thought to have. Maybe I should kind of cut back a little bit or
Mhm.
completely. But those are all like personal decisions.
Yeah, you know what amazes me is, like yeah, like, it just what amazes me is, like, there's no number, there's no number.
Yeah.
So, it's like, I think we're so quick to call people, like, "You're an alcoholic," or "You're this," and that kind of a thing. Like, it kinda becomes, um I don't know, like, I feel like the word alcoholic became, like, very mainstream now that people are using it very mainstream too. So, yeah, like, this kinda, like, enlightens us too, like, to know what the problem is too. Like, I mean, I don't think it's good to add an unnecessary stress on yourself, you know? That's what I'm
Hmm.
saying. Maybe you don't have a drinking problem, but you're just making it such a big thing in your head that you're ending up to have a drinking problem, you know? Like,
Yeah.
maybe asking these right questions are more important than counting the drinks that you drink during the day during the week kind of a thing. Like, it's
Hmm.
more qualitative than it is quantitative in the end.
Well, and I
Um,
want to mention too, it's alcohol use disorder can happen at any time in life as well.
yeah.
So like if you could potentially have had a completely healthy relationship with alcohol for most of your life, and then suddenly maybe you went through a traumatic situation, or some situation where maybe you started turning more to alcohol to cope,
Mhm.
and now it's becoming more of a strain on your emotional well-being. Is that there's no shame in seeking help if you think that you need it. And it's also important to recognize that sometimes we may develop these poor relationships with things over time. Like, just because at one point in our life that we had no problem with alcohol and we felt everything was well managed doesn't mean that we couldn't develop a use problem later in life either. So it's just something to constantly be mindful of, our use and our relationship with things, and recognizing when it could be potentially becoming an issue.
Yeah, and maybe you don't have a drinking problem, but you don't like the impact of alcohol that it's making you. I mean, I, for one, can count a lot of things. I don't like the feeling dehydrated the day after, which one of the things that I noticed too, like as alcohol consumption is going down, the hydration products are like more and more like rising in the industry. Like we see a lot of different hydration products, right? Like um,
Hmm.
I think, like, for example, Pedialyte is mainstream now. Like, I think that was
Yeah.
more the
Or
medical thing.
Gatorade, Gatorade.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can find them in, like, gas stations right now, like, available and
Yep.
everything. Like, Gatorades, everybody has some sort of, like, a, rehydration drink kind of a thing so that they can hydrate themselves better.
I think, like, sober curious and kind of sober lifestyles have been picking up a lot in the mainstream, or even just like dry January, just choosing not to drink for a whole month.
Yeah. Well, you know how you were talking about mocktails too, like, they're becoming
Yeah.
more and more popular, 100%.
hmm I think that's just been becoming more of a conversation of people, I think, recognizing that, oh, I don't actually need alcohol as much as I originally maybe used to use it.
Yeah.
Um, And I kind of want to leave us off, I guess, here on the podcast is just talking about some tips for if you do want to embrace a sober curious lifestyle, or want to try something like a dry January, and like how we can cut back on alcohol and ways that we can make ourselves successful in that.
Yes. So, you know how we talked about, like, living in Midwest and then how the environment is, impacting us too. I think one of the things could be recognizing what could be those triggers.
hmm
I want to lead with external triggers, the family gatherings or like going to a certain environment. So, when you associate your environment with drinking, you tend to drink more because that's
hmm
what you do in there. Whether
hmm
it's, like, going to your favorite restaurant and then you love their drinks, and then every single time you go there, you drink something, or going to your aunt's house, every single time you go there, she gives you a glass of wine, and then that's what you're seeking for when you go there. Or you can be
hmm
in, like, triggering situations, like it's a birthday party or it's some sort of a
hmm
family gathering, as I've mentioned, or, like, you've
hmm
decided to go out with your friends and then have a dinner and they're drinking something. It's kind of like triggering you to order a drink for yourself too. So I think identifying and recognizing those things are important so you can plan your life accordingly.
Or even taking like those tempting situations and become more mindful of them. But, maybe when you hang out with your friends a lot, you go to a bar and you're wanting to cut back on drinking, maybe changing the location of
Yeah.
like where you're going to hang out. Like today we're going to go mini golfing. Remove yourself from those situations. I like you brought up the external stuff, but there's also the internal ways
Yeah.
as well, or internal triggers for drinking that we need to be aware of. Like, the urge to drink sometimes may seem like it's just popping up, but if you pause and think about it when that's happening, you can often find that the urge may be set off by something that happened, or maybe you're having like an emotion within you, whether it's
Mhm.
positive or negative. Could be frustration, stress, anger, maybe excitement if it's positive, or maybe you're even having some physical sensations in your body too, like you're feeling tension, stress, maybe you're feeling nervous. And so you're having that internal trigger to want to reach for a drink.
Mhm.
So just being like aware of kind of your triggers and addressing those, I think is a big step. A lot of the times we go, I want to stop drinking, but then we don't take a step back. We kind of talk about this in our SMART goals as well. We don't really
Mhm.
take a step back to recognize where are our stress points, because that's where we actually want to start making the changes from, instead of just saying, I'm going to do this. But yeah, environmental managements, you kind of mentioned that,
Yeah.
changing location for things, recognizing external stuff. Maybe we remove alcohol completely from our home.
I think we like to, as human beings, we like to, like, always test the water first. Like, even with, like, certain
hmm
habits too, when you, develop, like, certain bad habits per se, you kinda like to test the water a little bit. If you
hmm
start drinking, kinda like, you're stretching it a little bit more, the home drinking, yes, maybe it could be a good idea to kind of remove it from that situation. Because sometimes
hmm
we're a social drinkers, and then it becomes more like you're drinking and you're alone at home and you're drinking and it becomes like like a thing for you. Maybe in those kind of situations, it's important to kind of like remove it from your home too. So
Definitely. I think also learning how to say no. That's
yeah.
something I think a lot of us struggle with. But, if we're like, we can environmentally manage ourselves, like externally, remove ourselves from situations. But sometimes there might be situations where we can't remove ourselves, that we know there's going to be alcohol. Like we really want to go to that holiday family gathering, and we know alcohol is going to be there. We can't just say, sorry, family, like I'm not coming, because,
Yeah.
you want to be able to go. So practicing how you're going to say no thanks can be really helpful, especially since I know we've said throughout this whole podcast, like there's no shame from our point of like whether you want to drink or not, but I know there are people out there who still may come from families or have friends that would shame them for choosing not to drink. So
Mhm.
it's important to just like practice. How are you going to say no, especially if they're asking like why, or they're going to pressure you to drink when you don't want to. So some points to kind of keep in mind for that is don't hesitate when you're saying like no thanks, because it will give you a chance to think of reasons to go along with any peer pressure that they have. You want to just like look directly at the person, make eye contact, tell them no thank you, I'm not drinking, or just no thanks, I don't want the drink. Keep your responses short. You don't need to offer everybody an explanation for why you're choosing not to drink in that moment. If they do ask, because I know sometimes you may come across that if you have family that's like, well, why that you don't want to drink, you can continue to just say, no, no, thank you. I don't want to. Or if you want to explain, you could tell them I'm just cutting
Yeah.
back. You don't need to constantly like give everybody like reasons for it. A no is a no, and it's
Yeah.
fine.
Well, going back to that internal portion of the things too, like I kind of want to refer back to something. As human beings, like we tend to want to be part of the group. So you might feel a little bit like weird on that moment. I don't know the feeling, maybe isolated in that moment when you're saying no to, which is totally normal. Like those internal feelings, the
Hmm.
internal feeling that you might be getting when you say no to certain things, like it might make
Hmm.
you feel uncomfortable because it's normal as human beings. It's in your core to feel like you're part of a group. You're doing the same exact things that they do because it's better
Hmm.
to be do wrong, like, as human beings and feel like we're part of something, we're part of a bigger group, like, bigger picture than, uh, being right and alone. So, like, it's a
Hmm.
hard pill to swallow, and I think recognizing that and having an awareness, it kinda helps you to cope with that emotion a little bit better too. So that's why I wanted to leave
Yeah.
that piece as well too, like, by referring
Mhm.
back to that internal impacts, like
Yeah, that's great that you brought that up. I really like that because that's true. It makes it so much harder when we feel alone in that. And I
Mhm,
think that's where having like accountability can be helpful, not just to like keep us on our track of our goals, but to feel like we're not alone. So like being able to tell like a friend or a family member, opening up to them, and someone that would encourage you to, do what's best for you, but being able to open up to them about why, or like that you're going to be
mhm,
doing this, like not only brings that accountability of like, hey, how are you doing with this, but also to know that you're not alone and you have a support system in that, because
mhm,
that is one of the reasons I think a lot of us fail at certain goals, even if we've set a completely good like smart goal and we're
mhm.
motivated and we're doing all these things. If we're feeling alone in what we're doing, it makes it really really hard to want to stick with it.
Yeah, and someone you can trust though, someone you can confide in because I personally think, these kind of, like, situations where it's alcohol or some sort of, like, when it's seasoned as an addiction, it gives so much power to that other person, and it may
Mhm.
almost feel like, that they're invading your space, so make sure that that person is, someone you can be vulnerable with, someone you can trust too.
Along with also alcohol, if we're cutting back on our alcohol or cutting it out completely for a short time or for forever, whatever our goals are there, finding better stress management skills. If alcohol was something that we used for coping with stress, finding healthier ways to manage our stress is always important, to replace that so we can continue with those healthful habits. So, exercise, mindfulness, journaling, maybe picking up arts and crafts, music, gaming, literally anything else that could be something that we can use to help manage our stress that's going
Mhm.
to be helpful is a good thing to implement.
Yes. And I think the other thing is our nutrition too. Having balanced nutrients, fruits and vegetables of course are important too, but having a balanced diet, making sure that you incorporate everything that you need, lean proteins, whole grains,
Hmm.
healthy fats.
Yeah, balanced diets are definitely important, and it's good to like mention that too, because especially when we're talking about mental health, like what we're eating and what we're putting in our body fuel, it's the building blocks for our brain and for our physical and mental health. So if we're not giving our bodies the proper fuel to be able to build the necessary components like our neurotransmitters, we're not going to be we're not going to be feeling our best, and we're not going to be managing at our best. But in general, also, like, if you have, say you have tried dry January this month and you did slip up, just remember that you're not a failure if you failed. Like, those are separate. Setbacks are common, especially when you're trying to make any big changes. Progress in the long run is really what counts here. It doesn't help to sit in shame, guilt, or anger, and it's never too late to start again. You can start again now. You don't need to wait until tomorrow or next week to start again.
I know this is gonna sound very cringy. Yeah, like, I know this is gonna sound very cringy, but I really wanna leave it with that. Yes, failure is actually necessary sometimes because you see why you fail, you know? You can actually collect a lot of information from there and then restart it. And there's no
Mhm.
limit on it, you know? Like, no shame around it either. You're just trying to figure the way out. Like, it's like an invention, actually, like understanding yourself and then re-beginning, restarting after seeing all of the,
Mhm.
"Oh, these were my weaknesses, and this is what led me to fail last time, and now I can start by eliminating some of these things, and then
Mhm.
start brand new and don't give up." Because I think the bottom line and the most important thing is not to give up on yourself and not to give up on your goals and dreams.
Mhm.
So, if you really wanna do something, do not give up on that.
Well said. So that's kind of going to be the end of our episode today. Not kind of, that will be the end of our episode
Yes,
today.
we're done. I'm
But
tired.
we'll leave it on that note. So, but thank you guys for listening or watching us today. Um we release episodes every other Wednesday on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube because we have video now. And yeah, if you have topics of interest that you would like us to cover, you can always leave a comment. We appreciate any likes, thumbs up, follows, whatever, on whatever platform that you are listening or watching on. Thank you to our listeners out there,
Thank
and
you.
we will see you guys next time.
See ya.
Bye.